I'm Dr. Duke with The New American. Well, I watched the Democrat debate yesterday. I did it so you wouldn't have to. I mean, let's face it. Everybody knows what they're going to say. Everybody knows there's not going to be much substance. And everybody knows that what they do say is going to be highly, highly scripted and political. So I took the bullet. I watched it for you. And I got to tell you, one of the things about these Democrat debates that more and more have revealed themselves to us is the box, the absolute box, the corner that Democrats have painted themselves into on account of identity politics. You've got Rahm Emanuel, who's as big of a progressive dork as you're ever going to find. He's the smug former Obama cabinet minister. He's the completely failed mayor of Chicago. But even he realizes, and every other month it seems like Rahm Emanuel writes an op-ed in some major newspaper begging the Democrats to give up identity politics. Please stop making everything about identity. Because Rahm Emanuel, for all of his faults and all of his failures, understands that kind of tribalistic, polarizing, race-based, ideological identification politics is going to turn off 80% of the country. Not the 25% that work in media, the 20% that work in academia. I'm talking about the 80% of the rest of us who just get tired of being either pandered to if we're minorities or blamed for everything if we're not. And so no one is going to remember almost anything that happened last night. I've forgotten most of it. Nobody really tuned in to watch it. But what's the news all about? The news is primarily about how white it was, right? So we had Kamala Harris drop out. Cory Booker dropped out yesterday, the day of the debate. But the fact is that neither one of them had the kind of support, had the kind of numbers that would have allowed them on stage to begin with. Yang, the candidate Yang, who's also an Asian American, a minority, he didn't have enough numbers. And so the argument now is that the real problem here is how white, and the Democrats are wringing their hands over this. You got Bernie Sanders, you got Elizabeth Warren, who actually tried to steal the identity of a Native American, succeeded in doing it for about 20 years as a faculty member at Harvard, all wringing their hands about the unbearable whiteness of their being. But you know the funny thing? For all of the dedicated, radicalized insistence from our hyper-white Democrat candidates that they're on the side of this, they believe in identity politics, that they believe that white privilege is a thing, that they believe that white people have unjustly usurped all sorts of perks and prerogatives from minorities. Biden believes it. Bernie clearly believes it in his socialist diatribes. Elizabeth Warren made a career at Harvard and beyond pretending that she believed it, even as she was hijacking a Native American identity. Yet, you know, the funny thing is not one of them has volunteered to step down. Not one of them has volunteered to walk away from the campaign. Not one of them has said, hey, I'm going to look at you tonight on national TV at this debate, and I'm going to walk off stage before it begins. Here's what I want you to do. If you support me, Elizabeth Warren, I want you to immediately transfer all your support to Cory Booker, to Kamala Harris, to anybody other than me. That would be the woke thing to do. That would be a way of atoning for your white privilege. That would be a way of using national TV and resources to redirect your voters for the good of the country in the name of identity politics. To please vote for, hell, pick any name out of the phone book that happens to be a minority. Vote for them instead of me. Swing your support. Swing your donations. Elizabeth Warren should have volunteered that all of her campaign funds be redirected to minority causes, minority campaign issues. People running for office who were actual minorities. But of course, the white intelligentsia of the Democrat Party did no such thing. So they all wrang their hands. And I want to go back for a moment about Elizabeth Warren. I've already mentioned the particular hypocrisy of her. Here's a woman who, for her entire tenure at Harvard University, made up for herself a Native American heritage that was fake, that allowed her to take a job away from an actual Native American candidate, a professor, who could have filled a affirmative action hire. So there is somewhere in America a qualified African-American professor who, because of Elizabeth Warren, did not get the pedigree, the attention, the salary, the perks, the benefits, the retirement that she got from becoming a Harvard professor on a Native American affirmative action hire. If she's serious about this, Elizabeth Warren, and not just a complete lying hypocrite, she should tally up the cost of her salary for every year she worked at Harvard. the all the money that was put into her retirement and her insurance while she was working there, all the perks and benefits, tally those up reasonably. Then find one Native American woman somewhere and transfer all of that wealth directly to her. First thing, Liz, you and your rich husband can afford it, number one. Number two, wouldn't that be a way of actually addressing the problem you say exists without having to stand up there and wring your hands? And so it does beg a question, right? If the purpose of the Democrat Party now is left-wing social justice politics, critical race theory, identity politics, then we can't go forward this way. We need a situation in which the white candidates get together and they figure out a way to put somebody on the ticket who's not them. But you know the egos of these progressives won't let them do it. Elizabeth Warren had no problem stealing a minority identity to make a career for herself. What makes you think her actual concern for Native Americans or minorities is sincere? Bernie Sanders claims to be a socialist. He claims to be somebody who believes in white imperialism, white colonialism, the idea of the patriarchy, the idea that white people, particularly Christians, who at one point, Bernie Sanders actually said he did not believe that Christians should be able to serve in government because of their religious positions. All right? So he's willing to go out on a limb for non-Christians and get rid of Christians serving in public office. But what about him? He's guilty of a much greater sin than being a Christian, which he never was. His great sin is being white and male. That's a much bigger problem to identity warriors, social justice warriors, than is simply being a Christian. You can be a Christian who promotes social justice Christianity, right? You could believe in liberation theology. But he is a white man, and as we know, according to the dictates of the left that he supports, it is impossible to overcome your white maleness. So Bernie, follow not just the rhetoric the academic rhetoric that you speak. Don't forget, Sanders' wife was a high-ranking educational official, an administrator, but your own socialism. The own socialism you promote has its own race and gender class warfare, right? The idea that it's time to, in the name of socialism and equity, take power and property, take power and opportunity away from white men. You've been in government for 30 years. Don't you think, Bernie, it's time to give that up for somebody of color who could begin their career? What entitles you, Bernie, because you're a socialist and a white man? How can you argue you're entitled not just to the 30 years off the public dole you've served, but to serve another 4 or 8 terms now as its president? If you were honest, you would step down. Pete Buttigieg, right? You too. You talk about your privilege. You were a Rhodes Scholar. You talk about the white couple, how rich your parents were, how many opportunities you had. You wouldn't have gotten to be the mayor of a small town in Indiana. You would have gotten that perk and prerogative had you not had all the privilege that you enjoyed before this. Why don't you step aside? I get it. Your claim to fame, the one thing you keep telling us is that you're gay and that makes you different. But there are many black and brown skinned queer people. There are many potential candidates for office who are gay and also a minority. For the good of the country, to follow the own social justice precepts that you push on the world, why don't you step aside? And this goes down and down the list. In fact, the only African-American candidate who's still in the race is Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. And I'm sorry to say this, but I think Deval Patrick has lower name recognition across the country than I do. And that's pathetic. The only reason he hasn't dropped out is because no one's ever yet figured out that he's in the race. And what did Deval Patrick do when Cory Booker dropped out and leaving him the only black? He called it shameful, went on public airwaves to talk about how utterly shameful it was that the debate primary, the candidates were all white. So there you go, Deval Patrick. No one pays attention to you for your campaign reason. No one's listening to what you have to say. Nobody even knows who you are. But the minute the last African-American is no longer on the stage, you come out and you get a lot of attention for whining about how unblack the candidates are, how unminority the candidates are. At this point, I'm not sure what to tell you. But if rich doesn't discount you, if white doesn't discount you, if stealing somebody else's heritage doesn't discount you, then let's just go with 4 more years of Donald Trump. Because he's white, he's male, and he's rich. The difference between him and you is he doesn't pretend it's a problem. You on the left do. So let's just cut the drama. Go ahead and vote for Donald Trump in the name of social justice, in the name of identity politics. I'm Dr. Duke with The New American.